Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Killer Bites, and this one is quite popular to those who happen to be Little Monsters, aka Lady Gaga fans. Today I'm talking about Patrizia Reggiani and her murder-for-hire plot to kill her ex-husband Maurizio Gucci. That's right, that Gucci. We'll see how fame and fortune can truly change a person and get into where Patrizia is today. Let's jump on in, shall we? Our story begins in Vignola, Italy on December 2nd, 1948, where Patrizia Martinelli was born. Patrizia was an only child raised by her mother Silvana, who worked as a waitress and a launderer. Sadly, Patrizia never knew who her real father was, but was eventually adopted by her stepfather, Ferdinando, when she was 12 years old. Ferdinando was a trucking and transportation magnate, and because of his status, this threw Patrizia and her mother into a world of small wealth and status. The family moved to Milan, which was still on the up and up at the time, and Patrizia finished her schooling there. After graduating high school, she enrolled in classes to become a translator and became fluent in French and English. Patrizia's friends saw her interest in becoming a socialite starting very early in life. All this hoping and dreaming would finally pay off in November of 1970. At a party in Milan, Patrizia was there to dance, be the life of the party, and meet someone who could take her to the next level. That person? Maurizio Gucci, the heir to the Gucci fashion house fortune. Now, Patrizia and Maurizio could not have been more different in personality. Patrizia was a socialite who wanted to be out and about, while Maurizio was far more reserved and shy. Patrizia said in an interview with The Guardian in 2016, "I didn't think much of him at first. He was just a quiet boy whose teeth crossed over at the front. But something connected between the two of them that night, and soon after, they started dating." Maurizio allegedly asked Patrizia to marry him on their second ever date. So they moved quickly. But just because the couple was happy, it didn't mean that everyone else was, especially not Maurizio's father, Rodolfo. You know how rich people stay rich? By keeping those who are not rich out of their lives and fortune. Rodolfo viewed Patrizia as a gold digger and social climber who was only after Maurizio to take his fortune. The protective energy made sense as Rodolfo had raised Maurizio all on his own after the death of his wife. 17 years later and some other woman comes in trying to ruin all that? I guess you would be a little suspicious and cautious. But Patrizia was a major point of contention between the father and son. So much so that Rodolfo disowned Maurizio and the two did not speak to each other for 2 years. Maurizio packed his bags and moved in with Patrizia and her family. He got a job working at Ferdinando's transportation company, and the two continued to date. Despite the massive pushback from Rodolfo, the two were young, in love, and desperate to tie the knot. They ended up getting married in 1972 in Milan, where none of the Gucci family showed up. In fact, Rodolfo was so opposed to the marriage that he went to the archbishop begging him to stop the ceremony. This was unsuccessful. While the family drama is interesting, Patrizia hated the separation of the two families and wanted to heal the relationship between her husband and his father. She made it her mission to repair what had been broken, and she made it happen. Patrizia had a way with words, and as a late wedding gift, Rodolfo got the newlyweds a beautiful luxury penthouse in the Olympic Tower in New York City. Why New York, you ask? Well, the Gucci empire was interested in having someone younger take over and move the company further into the US. Where better than the biggest, most fashionable city in the States? Because of Maurizio's time in the US, the Gucci brand thrived. They had 2 stores on Fifth Avenue and expanded into other apparel such as luggage, bags, shoes, and accessories. Patrizia loved living in New York because this gave her access to all kinds of high-status parties and events. She even became friends with Jackie Kennedy Onassis, the First Lady of the United States of America. No biggie. After the couple moved to the United States, they had 2 children. In 1976, they gave birth to a baby girl, Alessandra, and in 1981, another baby girl named Allegra. The 2 little girls would have the childhood directly opposite of their mother, attending the best schools, going on lavish vacations, and having weekend getaways to islands, farmhouses, etc. Maurizio never seemed to have the confidence that Patrizia had. She knew that Maurizio could have such an incredible life if only he could stand up and become a force within the Gucci family. And in 1983, he would be thrust into that life after the death of his father Rodolfo, who left Maurizio a 50% stake in the company, the largest of anyone attached to the name. Before his passing, however, Rodolfo told Patrizia to watch out for Maurizio. He said the fortune would go to his head and completely change their relationship. We love a foreshadowing moment. And when people say more money, more problems, they aren't joking. Everyone felt like they were entitled to certain percentages of the company and that they knew what was best for the business going forward. Of course, no one ever agreed and tensions continued to rise. Aldo, one of Maurizio's uncles, was tasked with spearheading the US market and was even called a man of great vision by his nephew Maurizio. He helped expand the company to Beverly Hills, Chicago, Florida, and open their first store in New York. However, he was caught siphoning off millions of dollars and because of this was sued by Gucci and Maurizio became the chairman of the company. Aldo also pleaded guilty to tax evasion charges in 1986 and paid more than $7 million to the government. You want to know who spilled the beans to the feds? His son, Paolo Gucci. This is what Patrizia wanted all along, but the Gucci brand was starting to lose its uniqueness and was quickly becoming bombarded with knockoffs. On top of that, the company was so far in the red, so far in debt, that it was looking too difficult to come back from. And just when you think things couldn't get any worse, they do. Maurizio and the entire house of Gucci found themselves deep in legal battles. With so much stress in his career, Maurizio started to pay less and less attention to his family. His daughters and Patrizia were cast to the shadows. All Patrizia wanted to do was help her husband, but her actions quickly became smothering instead of helpful. She started turning Maurizio and his family members against each other. She wanted to sustain the Gucci name, but she also wanted to make sure she would have the money and lifestyle she worked so hard to get. Nothing and nobody was going to get in the way of her wealthy, lavish, extravagant lifestyle, especially not Maurizio's family. Maurizio stopped looking to her for help and guidance and instead went to lawyers to work on the company's issues. This hurt Patrizia because she felt like the two were a team. He stopped confiding in her and became more and more detached. Patrizia said that he stopped coming home during lunchtime, which was a normal ritual, and was thrust further into his work and all the legal troubles that came with it. In May of 1985, everything finally boiled over. Their marriage was in complete shambles. Maurizio told Patrizia that he was going on a work trip in Florence, which was not uncommon. However, the following day, he sent a friend over to the house to tell Patrizia that the marriage was over and he wanted a divorce. Instead of asking for divorce in person, Maurizio asked her to keep up appearances and attend Gucci functions and events with him. He said he would continue to support her lifestyle, but that the marriage was over. This flipped Patrizia's world upside down. She was utterly heartbroken and took solace with her good friend Giuseppina Auriemma, who she called Pina. Pina was an astrologer and would read Patrizia's tarot cards and fortune to her often. She was one of the only things holding the woman together. It didn't help that Maurizio had moved on. He began dating a woman named Paola Franchi, who was a childhood friend of Maurizio, and even attended his wedding to Patrizia. This only made Patrizia more resentful, angry, and heartbroken. She wasn't ready to move on, but he already had. There wasn't much else she could do. Unless... dun dun dun. Now, while Patrizia was crying and getting her palm read from Pina, Maurizio had bigger fish to fry. Sure, he didn't have to worry about his ex-wife getting in the middle of things anymore, but the company was still down bad. They were losing money left and right, but Maurizio had a plan. He joined up with an investment banking company called InvestCorp to slowly buy out everyone in his family's share, or secretly push them out without their knowledge. Because of this, a bunch of money started funneling back into Maurizio's pockets. And yet again, with more money comes what? More problems. He hired a retail executive by the name of Don Mello, who helped make the brand more exclusive again. Next, he hired up-and-coming designer Tom Ford, yes, that Tom Ford, to design their new ready-to-wear styles. The brand was slowly starting to rise from the ashes, but with little help from Maurizio. In 1993, InvestCorp bought out Maurizio's 50% share, and after that, no one from the Gucci family was on the board for the Gucci brand. It wasn't until 1994 that Patrizia agreed to follow through with the divorce. Maurizio, along with funding her lifestyle, agreed to pay her almost $1.5 million in alimony. He also demanded that Patrizia stop using the last name Gucci, as she was no longer a part of the family. But just because the court said to stop didn't mean she was going to stop, okay? She continued to use the name, stating, "I still feel like a Gucci. In fact, the most Gucci of them all." She felt like she was losing the power that came with the Gucci name, so instead of dropping it, even by court order, she continued to use it to her advantage. Things took a turn for the worse on March 27, 1995, when Maurizio Gucci was found shot to death outside his office in Milan just after 8:30 in the morning. The hitman fired 3 times, the final bullet going into Maurizio's temple. The world was in shock, and everyone started giving their opinions of what really went down. Was it a bad business deal? Familial hatred? Or was Patrizia somehow behind it? Now, if you were me, you would probably think that Patrizia being behind all of it was just a little too on the nose. A bitter ex-wife after the Gucci fortune and jealous of her husband's new relationship. It just seems so cliche, you know? However, Patrizia had been insanely open about her hatred of her ex-husband, even going as far to tell a former housekeeper of hers, "If it's the last thing I do, I want to see him dead." And on her daughter's 18th birthday, she asked her divorce lawyer flat out if there was a way she could have Maurizio killed. She wasn't trying to be subtle at all. The further the investigation went, the more fingers started to point at Patrizia. For starters, Maurizio planned on marrying Paola. If that marriage had gone through, Patrizia's alimony would have dropped drastically. And by drastically, I mean $860,000 instead of $1.5 million. On the day Maurizio was killed, Patrizia wrote one word in her diary: paradisos, the Greek word for paradise. Come to find out, Maurizio was aware of his ex-wife's plan to have him killed. After a surgery to have a brain tumor removed, Patrizia found that Maurizio was nowhere in sight. This angered her to such a point that she recorded cassette tapes saying, "Maurizio, I'm not going to give you a minute of peace. You are a painful appendage that we all want to forget. The inferno for you is yet to come." These were then delivered to Maurizio for his listening pleasure. Mere hours after Maurizio's death, Patrizia demanded that Paola move out of the apartment she shared with Maurizio to make room for their daughters and, of course, Patrizia to move back in. After all, they were the ones who inherited the property, and Paola was an unwanted guest. Paola spent the short amount of time she could grabbing all of her belongings, including utensils and lighting fixtures. Patrizia organized the funeral and sat in the front row with her daughters. Reporters outside were desperate for statements and sound bites, and they perhaps got one of the most iconic and horrific ones from Patrizia. She said, "On a human level, I'm sorry. On a personal level, I can't say the same thing." She was really out here saying everything but "I hired a hitman to kill my ex-husband." For years, nothing came of finding Maurizio's murders. There were little to no leads, and while it seemed obvious that Patrizia was to blame, there was no tangible evidence putting her at the front of authorities' minds. Investigators scoured bank records, contracts, anything that could place a bad business deal as the reason for Maurizio's death. Nothing. In 1997, the police received an anonymous tip that a small group of men and 2 women were the ones responsible for the murder. Apparently, a young man named Gabriel overheard a doorman at his hotel bragging to someone about planning the hit on the head of Gucci. Pina, Patrizia's friend, worked as the middleman connecting the angry ex-wife to Benedetto, an owner of a pizzeria and a mechanic who worked nearby to do the dirty job and drive the getaway vehicle. He sourced the firearm, built a silencer for it, and carried out the hit. Investigators followed the suspects, placing recording devices in their cars, and got their confessions on tape. There was no denying who had planned and carried out the crime. In 1998, Patrizia was eventually arrested wearing a mink coat and loads of jewelry. She was sentenced to 29 years in prison, which was later changed to 26 years. Patrizia demanded that the sentencing be overturned due to the brain tumor she had. But after 43 boxes of evidence were presented at the trial, along with all of her diary entries writing out every single interaction she'd had with Maurizio, no one had much sympathy for her. In 2000, Patrizia attempted to take her own life in prison with a bedsheet, but was found by prison guards. 5 years later, Patrizia's legal team convinced the prison to let her have her beloved pet ferret stay with her, despite pets not being allowed. In October of 2016, Patrizia was finally released from prison because of good behavior after only serving 18 years. Immediately after her release, she went shopping with a pet parrot perched on her shoulder. Her daughters refused to see her, and this angered her greatly. When it comes to Lady Gaga, Patrizia said she's angered by her decision to portray her in the House of Gucci film. Lady Gaga did not come to meet her in person, and to Patrizia, this is the most rude thing you can do. Well, I hope that if you didn't get the chance to see House of Gucci in theaters, this gave you some insight into what everyone has been talking about. I want to know what all of you think about this case. Do you think with more money comes more problems? To me, it definitely seems that way. Perhaps if there had been a better work-life balance, things could have been different. But what do I know? Instead of wearing real diamonds, I'm over here wearing cheap costume jewelry that turns my fingers green. Until next time, I'm Allie, and thanks for watching Killer Bites.